Imagine you've been caught for a crime hundreds of years ago. The judge looks at you and says, "You have two choices, death or castration. Which would you choose?" Sounds easy, right? But here's the twist. In many cultures, people actually feared castration far more than execution. Today, we're diving into one of history's most disturbing comparisons. Which was truly worse, losing your life or losing the part of yourself that society thought defined you? Castration may have a medieval ring to modern ears, and in many cases, that was literally true. However, this punishment did not occur only during the Middle Ages only. The threat of castration over men on conviction of crimes such as rape, adultery, treason, or rebellion lingered throughout the ancient world and across the Renaissance, and indeed even into the 19th century in some regions. Whereas a simple execution could come and kill someone completely, castration would leave an individual not killed, but one who will never be the same. The psychological weight of that fact can't be overstated. You wouldn't just be punished, you'd be remade. And in a society where masculinity was tied to honor, strength, and the ability to have children, castration was more than physical. It was social death. Let's go way back. In ancient Mesopotamia, castration was sometimes used on slaves to make them safer for service in royal households, especially around the king's wives and daughters. In China, the imperial court's eunuchs were often political pawns. Some were punished criminals. Others were poor men who volunteered for castration in exchange for stable work. Volunteered in quotation marks, because for many, it was the only way out of poverty. The Han Dynasty in China, 206 BCE, 220 CE, made castration one of the infamous 5 punishments. For certain crimes, you wouldn't face the executioner's blade, but a knife in the hands of the state surgeon. And unlike execution, castration could also be combined with exile, meaning you'd live, but far from home, cut off from your family and your old identity. Now compare that with execution in the same era. Death, whether by beheading, hanging, or even more brutal methods, was final. In a way, many considered it merciful compared to lifelong humiliation. Families could mourn a dead relative, honor them with burial rites, and move on. But a castrated man, he might be alive, but often he was considered less than whole and was treated as such. In some cultures, especially in the West, execution could even restore a criminal's honor in a twisted way. You died paying your debt to society. Castration, on the other hand, meant walking the streets as a living reminder of shame. Religion contributed significantly to determining what was the worst. In a lot of medieval Christian culture, corporeal integrity was associated with beliefs in resurrection, and thus castration could have been regarded as spiritually maiming. Execution, on the other hand, could be regarded as a temporary separation of the body till Judgment Day. According to Islamic legal traditions, mutilation was unwanted by the Islamic culture since it was quite dishonorable to mutilate the body God created. In Imperial China, however, castration was political. It made eunuchs loyal since they could not create their own dynasties. Nevertheless, at the same time, the stigma was huge. As much as eunuchs could advance to eminent positions in their court politics, they were ridiculed and scorned by society. And here's where we get to the heart of it: fear. People in the past feared castration for the same reason people today fear social ruin. Execution ended pain. Castration meant living with it. Imagine the gossip, the loss of status, the physical weakness that followed. In battlefields, even the threat of genital mutilation was used to terrify enemies into surrender. One medieval European chronicler wrote that captured rebels sometimes begged for immediate execution when they learned castration was an option. To them, dying on the spot was preferable to a lifetime of ridicule and inability to start a family. Let's look at a real example. In the Byzantine Empire, political rivals were sometimes spared execution, but castrated instead, precisely because it removed them from the line of succession. In 769 CE, the rebel Constantine Papadopoulos was executed, but his brother Strategios was castrated. Why? Strategios was still useful as a bureaucrat, but no longer a threat to the throne. The message was clear: You might live, but you'd never pass on your bloodline or claim real power again. Of course, execution could be designed to be terrifying too. Public hangings, burnings at the stake, and the breaking wheel weren't just about ending a life. They were about sending a message. But here's the key difference. An execution's horror ended with the event itself. Castration's horror lingered every day after. It was the slow punishment, mental, physical, and social, that some rulers preferred when they wanted to break someone without martyring them. In Western Europe, castration was most frequently associated with sex crimes in the High Middle Ages. Earlier in the 12th century, the English Leges Henrici Primi, an early law code, suggested castration to be the course of action against rapists. According to the chroniclers, this penalty was occasionally inflicted publicly so as to add as much disgrace as possible. And yet, some victims of this punishment were completely innocent, targets of political revenge. In such cases, castration was a way to keep them alive to witness their own downfall, which could be even more psychologically devastating than execution. Here's where it gets tricky. Some rulers considered castration a merciful alternative to death. They could say, "Look, I spared you," but to the victim, that mercy could feel like a cruel joke. It was survival at the cost of dignity, love, and the future. One Chinese eunuch memoir from the late Ming period described life after castration as breathing without living. That's how deep the punishment cut, literally and figuratively. In Europe by the 18th and 19th centuries, the use of castration as a punishment in law had virtually vanished, and its place had been taken by the very long term of imprisonment or exile. This had changed the public opinion, where mutilation was viewed as barbaric. Capital crimes were still put to the rack, but the era of judicial castration was coming to an end. That said, the practice lingered in unofficial ways. In parts of the American frontier, mob justice sometimes included genital mutilation of enemies before killing them, a grim reminder that the idea of castration as a worse-than-death fate didn't vanish overnight. Even when it wasn't officially allowed, the threat of castration still held real power, used as a weapon in both war and politics. It symbolized total domination over the enemy, both physically and generationally. Execution might kill a man, but castration symbolically erased him from the future. This was especially potent in patriarchal societies where lineage was everything. Taking away a man's ability to father children wasn't just hurting him, it was erasing his name from history. From a purely physical standpoint, execution was obviously final. But when we look at social and psychological impact, many historical figures would have told you castration was worse. Death ended suffering. Castration meant a lifetime of it. In societies obsessed with honor, masculinity, and legacy, living as a eunuch could mean being treated as less than human forever. Today, most of the world considers both punishments inhumane and illegal, but the question still stirs debate among historians. Was castration an act of mercy, sparing life, or was it actually the crueler choice? The answer depends on what you value more, life at any cost, or dignity even in death. And perhaps that is the scariest thing about it. Castration, to a great extent, was not the enemy of execution. It was its shadow. One destroyed your life altogether. The other permitted you to continue breathing, but nevertheless removed the life that you recognized. Are you the former person, departed and not really dead? And in case this in-depth look at one of the most dreadful punishments of all time opened your eyes, hit like, share it with someone who probably would also find it really disturbing, and subscribe to more mind-opening pieces of historical context. Because not everything about history is tagged with the heroes and the glory. Sometimes it is gritty and bloody, and much more ugly than death itself.